Disappear by Jack Greenspan. Read by Charles Bice. Sunset Park. The best place to watch the sunset in Las Vegas was at the east end of the airport, just underneath the landing jets. Staring west as the sun slipped behind the Red Rock Mountains, the obsidian, angled shape of the Luxor fell into sharp relief against the stretched-out orange glow. Sundown in the desert beat out any other geography, hands down. On the water, the sunset would linger, bouncing on the waves, but in the desert there was nothing for the light to hold on to, nothing to trap it, bribe it to stay any longer than absolutely necessary. It ran, fled after the day like a scared rabbit. It was my favorite time of day. I loved it out here, for however long it lasted. I thrived in the liminal time, the gray area between light and dark. Playing with shadows was how I made my living. And it was a good living. Most nights, after watching the sun go down, I'd be getting ready to earn that living. I'd be filling my pockets with cards, setting coins, writing predictions which I knew would come true later in the evening. A few years ago, I'd be doing all this in a tuxedo, but not anymore. Now the uniform of choice, what the casinos wanted, was the street look. Dressed in jeans, t-shirt, and loose-fitting coat, sporting a few days' growth I wasn't exactly comfortable with, I fit in well with the tourists at the Manhattan Resort and Casino. They didn't suspect a thing until I walked up and asked them if they'd like to see something amazing. Then I'd amaze them for a few seconds with a magic trick I learned when I was still in high school. Nothing any of them couldn't do with the right book and 3 minutes of practice. Then send them back to the casino floor. But not tonight. I was off tonight. Asked for it special. I lit a cigarette. I watched the glowing cherry at the tip of my Turkish Camel. If I timed it right, the light from the sun would vanish, leaving just the glowing ember to illuminate my face. I waited for it, slowing my inhalation. The dark overtook me, the red glow giving my face a Stanley Kubrick look. I sucked in, drawing down to the filter. Smiling, I flicked the butt out toward the landing lights of the next plane coming in. I turned left and started to walk toward the park. I had an appointment to keep, and I didn't want to be late. In reality, I couldn't be late. She wasn't going anywhere until I got there. She was waiting for me. I knew it, even if she didn't know I knew. Her name was Raven, though she didn't acquire the name at birth. She hadn't been ushered into the waiting arms of loving parents who took one look at her and decided then and there what to call her. No, she was pushed out and virtually abandoned into the apathetic arms of grandparents who had no desire to raise another screaming, ungrateful child. But they did the right thing and took in baby girl Miller, which is what they called her for the first 6 months of her life. They had figured if they didn't give her a name, they couldn't get too attached. And then, if it all became too much, who would really miss a baby girl? But like it always happens, the prospect of another life to ruin became too much of a temptation to resist. Of course, that's not how they see it, but then, who really ever sees the damage they cause? By 6 months, they knew they would keep her, at least until she turned 14 and left on her own accord, with their blessing, and, it must be noted, to their great relief. With this realization, though, came the following thought. That baby girl might be fine for now, but wouldn't see her through her teenage years. Instead, they'd need a name that would sum up the unusually quiet little girl who had been born with a massive shock of dark hair and a preternatural fascination with shiny objects. A day trip to the Grand Canyon via helicopter to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary introduced them to Indian mythology. And by the time they'd gotten home and retrieved baby girl from the neighbor, they had decided to call her Raven. I knew her as well as anyone, I guess. She'd jumped boxes for me back when I did that kind of thing. I'm sure if I ever went back to the Big Illusions, she'd be there for me. That's probably how she knew where to find me. I had a warehouse nearby, a place for storage and rehearsal. I shared it with a couple of other guys, workers who had scored nice variety act spots when the big production shows started closing down. It was a good deal for all involved, and it was walking distance from where I was now, albeit in the opposite direction. This was my area of town. This was where I lived and created, where I prowled and hunted. She had come here looking for me. I determined I wasn't going to be hard to find. As I sauntered into the park, I saw her. Even in twilight, that figure was hard to miss. She was looking in the other direction. I could easily have ducked behind a tree or jogged to the playground. Hell, I could have just sat down at a picnic table and she would have kept staring right through me. But no, I wanted to get this over with. I stopped short and just stood still, inhaling the ozone-filled desert air. It would rain soon. The clouds were making their way east even now. Tomorrow I wouldn't be able to see the sun as it went down behind the gray, threatening sky. But then, depending on how this meeting went, it might not matter what the sky was like. There was a very good chance the sunset I had just enjoyed might be my last. Eventually she saw me and headed in my direction. She smiled like she caught me unaware. This was the difference between an amateur and a professional. In magic, it was marked by the outs. I never screwed up a trick, even if it didn't come out the way I had originally intended. No matter the situation, I had an out. But then, I'm a professional. An amateur, they have no outs. They only have one way to do something, and if things don't go as planned, well, that's when the fur starts to fly. And I didn't want that to happen. Not yet, at any rate. So I fought my instinct and closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. It wasn't often Vegas had that wet smell permeating the air. I concentrated on breathing and stood my ground, letting her do this her way. I didn't want her thinking she had no other options. Without options, this wouldn't turn out well for anyone. She walked up to me and stopped a foot away, her head tilted up to look me in the eye. Her face was illuminated by the distant glow of the basketball court lights. Where we stood, by the picnic tables, was meant only for daytime use. "Hi, Remy," she said. I nodded. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I had some ideas as to what she was doing here. I knew she was looking for me, but there was no sense diving in when I didn't know how deep the water was. "I've been looking for you." I nodded again. Magic is all about what the mark thinks they see, not what really happens. So one secret to a great trick, then, is knowing when to talk and when to let the audience make the connections for themselves. This was the latter. Whatever was really happening was secondary to whatever Raven thought was happening, and since I wasn't sure of either, I kept my mouth shut. "Things have gone a bit pear-shaped," she laughed nervously. Her eyes reflected the far-off light, giving them a depth they didn't actually possess. It made her look thoughtful and contrite. I didn't buy it. Not for a second. "Do tell," I countered. "I fucked up. That much I know. I was there for that part." "No, after that." There was an after? Now we were getting somewhere. "I thought everything was clear." Everything was clear. All you had to do was walk out of the building without touching anything. If you could have done that, walked past the pretty rocks and kept your hands to yourself, everything was clear. But you couldn't do that, could you? The tears streaming down her face glistened in the half-light. "How was I supposed to know they were counted? They were just there, sitting out, like fruit in a bowl or a candy dish at the dentist's office. How could they miss a couple?" "I told you they'd miss them. That's how you were supposed to know." I shook my head in disgust. I had trusted her with my secrets, but she couldn't control herself, and now I stopped. I still didn't know why she was here. If they wanted me, she would have taken me out already. Or at least she would have tried. I wouldn't have let her get close if I didn't think I could protect myself, but they would have known that. That was why I let myself get caught. I figured she was just a messenger doing what it is messengers do. I would listen, nod wisely, and then dispose of the body. I wasn't prepared for this. It seemed like she was asking me for something but wouldn't come right out and say it, and I couldn't parse it. A plane went by overhead. I didn't dare look up, not with her standing so close. But she couldn't resist. She glanced at the underbelly. I knew she would, and now I had a decision to make with not much time to make it. I opted for the safer of my two choices and stepped in toward her. I closed the distance between us and reached out with my left hand to grab her right arm. Pulling quickly, I spun her around and into me. My right arm wrapped around her chest while my left continued to hold her arm tight behind her back. To anyone walking through the park now, we looked like two lovers enjoying the nighttime amenities of the dark and the grass. I held her and placed my face close to hers, peeking over her shoulder like an evil Jiminy Cricket. We'd held this position many times before under much more pleasant circumstances. I breathed in deeply, letting her scent carry me back in time, just for a moment. My mind wandered old, worn pathways of almost forgotten emotion, but my hands held firm. I resisted the temptation to kiss her, almost.
"Remy,"
she pleaded. "What did you do?"
"They found out."
"They were diamonds, for God's sake. They're diamonds."
"But that's all."
"Those little rocks are money and blood and power and energy. They are never, that's all." She turned her head just enough. Our lips were barely separated. Our cover was a breath away from becoming reality.
"Remy."
My arms instinctively tightened around her, a Pavlovian response to her whispering my name. At least, that's what I told myself.
"You're hurting me."
"What did you do, Raven?" She smelled good. I could taste her scent on the back of my tongue. Jasmine and honey and the wetness of the air all mingled as I looked into her eyes. I didn't want to let her go. I didn't want her to stop hurting. I didn't want her. "Why are you here?" I held her tighter. She clenched. Her body's weight seemed to rest on my arm. Her eyes flinched, but they never left mine.
"I need you. I need your help."
"Why me?"
"Because you're the only one who can make me disappear."
I faltered and relaxed my grip. She started to fall forward. I caught her and lowered her to the ground. She wasn't going anywhere, and I knew she wasn't an immediate threat, so I lit another cigarette. She needed time to breathe. My coffin nail would give it to her. The smoke and nicotine I sucked deep into my lungs took her scent with it. She peered up at me, and I knew I had to look away. In the distance, a late-night pickup game of basketball was just getting started. I watched the skins beat the shirts until I had smoked down to the filter. In the silence, she had decided to tell me everything. I could feel her move around, turning so her back rested against my legs. Neither of us looked at the other anymore. Yet I didn't know if we'd ever been closer. The first time I kissed her had been here, at the park, and the second. It held memories of us in the blades of grass and the pocket-knife-carved picnic tables. It felt like the park was reclaiming us for its own.
"They caught me."
"And sent you to get me?"
"No."
I turned at the urgency of her denial.
"No,"
she continued, softer, still staring off into the distance.
"They don't know about you. They asked, but I didn't tell them."
"I'm sure they did more than ask."
"I got away."
I didn't want to know what she did to get away or what it cost her. It wasn't any of my business. What was my business was what she was doing here and why she needed me to make her vanish. Her motives were crystallizing in my mind. She hadn't told them about me. No matter that by giving them my name, she would have been in the clear. She could have simply looked them in the eye, told them Regal Remy had done it, had orchestrated the whole thing, given back the diamonds she stole, and her path would have become miraculously unblocked. Of course, as penance, they could have sent her to get me, which is exactly what I figured had happened. Evidently, I was wrong. She stood up and took my hand, leading me toward the trout-stocked lake in the middle of the park. It was a favorite for late-night lovers, consummating passions under the watchful eye of the Easter Island statue ensconced on a spit of land in the center. Our illusion was complete.
They figured it out a few days ago. I was at work, like you said. I was casual and relaxed, making tips and laying low. Pierre came in. I didn't think nothing of it. He's been in before, you know.
I did know. Pierre Chiron was the personal assistant to Scott Wilde, hotelier extraordinaire. He was a former enforcer on the local minor league hockey team who found work much more in line with his calling in life after a career-ending fight took him off the ice. He was also well known at the higher end of the local strip club spectrum. I know because we used to go together. We were together at one of those clubs the night I first met Raven. I'd been hired to work the smaller room in one of Wilde's casinos. It wasn't a bad gig, and I was mostly filling 250 seats a night, 6 nights a week. I'd been working with a girl called Catherine, blonde and pretty, and she knew how to jiggle when I needed her to distract the audience. But there was nothing there. She was passable as an assistant, but she was a lousy actress. No one bought it when she looked at me lovingly. I was surprised when the audience thought she even liked me. It was a job and nothing more. When she asked for a week off, I gladly let her go. Chiron suggested we get Raven to fill in for her. He had a thing for the exotic-looking stripper, and since he worked for my boss, I took his suggestion with a little more seriousness than maybe I should have. He went with me when I asked her to be my assistant.
Really? I've never done that before. I don't know if I'd be any good.
Sure you would, sweetie. It's easy. Anyone can do it, explained Pierre. That wasn't exactly true, but the reality wasn't far off. It took looks, the ability to move and smile, and point in the right direction at the right time. This was the heart of helping out a magician. Sure, there were others, partners, who did more, who knew more, but what I was asking this girl to do was climb in a box and wiggle her toes at the right time. It wasn't brain surgery. She looked at me for confirmation. I nodded and smiled my approval. Yeah, I think you'd be perfect, I said. She never looked at Pierre again. We met up the next day to rehearse. After an hour, I knew she'd be able to handle the gig. After 2, I left a message on Catherine's machine telling her not to come back. Raven and I played it big. Her looks and my magic had us turning 'em away at the door. Eventually, though, things went the way they've always gone with me. I found myself spending a little too much of my paycheck on the tables before I could get out the door. Then it was more than my paycheck, and I found myself doing odd jobs for Wilde himself, paying him back by using sleight-of-hand skills honed in years of practice to fuck with big casino winners or illusions to make people believe things which couldn't possibly be true. And through it all, Pierre was there, protecting his boss's interest. Evidently, those interests included going to see Raven at the club the night before last. Raven was still talking, still putting the whole story together for me. I guess she thought she owed me that much.
So he comes in and I see him and smile, right? Like always. I was hustling a little bit over by the bar. I figured I'd wait a few songs and then go say hi. When I looked back, though, he'd been taken to a table in the back, away from the stage.
I shook my head. He always likes to be close to the action.
That's what I thought. But Cinnamon took him to the back table, and then she came over and whispered in my ear that he really wants to see me. The way she said it, I knew he meant now, so I went over.
Those are dark tables. Anything can happen back there. Raven smiled. She'd been part and party to a few of those anythings. My first thought, however, was anything but sexy. Those back tables were the strip club equivalent of a dark alley. You never knew what was waiting for you. Usually you had the bouncers to watch your back, but when those guys worked for the guy who wanted to see you, you had no outs. And yet she was here, walking and talking.
I went up to him. I could barely see him, sitting all the way back in the booth. He asked me what I was doing there now that I was rich.
I would have expected that. It wasn't in his nature to waste time. She continued her story. I stopped listening to generalities. I just wanted to know the details. Sharon knew about the diamonds. He took her out the back door of the club, cutting her shift short. She ended up in the rear of a van, sucking on a 45, while good old Pierre told her they knew she was in on it. They knew she wasn't alone, that she couldn't have done it alone. She was hurt at the insinuation, but couldn't refute it. He never explained how they had pinched her, and she never told them it was me. According to her, my name was on a laundry list of possible masterminds, all minor operators and petty thieves, and she didn't give up anyone. There was only one other name on that list besides mine that was of any concern. I figured that name was the reason I was still alive. Paul Robbins was a thief, and a damn good one. He worked all sorts of odd jobs. I only met him once, and he stuck me for the bill. I didn't think he knew Raven, but then I wasn't sure who she knew. All his name told me was they didn't know for sure I was in on it, and there was no profitability in taking out one of your best on a hunch. How did you get away?
He threw me out the back of the van.
Just like that. She paused.
He fucked me first, gun still in my mouth.
That also sounded like him.
While he did it, he said he was going to do the same thing to whoever helped me.
I thought about it. I had to ask the question. And you decided to come to me?
They already think I'm guilty. Why put me in the thick? They don't think you're guilty. They think it was Paul. They just threw your name in to scare me. Pierre never liked you.
He liked me fine.
Not after we started working together.
That why he fucked you?
That's why he didn't like you.
I let it sink in. According to her, I was in the clear. I could keep working like nothing ever happened. So what do you need from me?
I told you. I need you to make me disappear. Just because they let me go doesn't make me free.
She had a point.
You make me vanish and I'm gone for good. No one's the wiser.
I turned around.
Remy.
I could hear the shake in her voice. The need.
Remy, please.
Not here. I started walking away. I could feel her scamper up behind me. The warehouse. The warehouse was in an industrial area about a quarter-mile from Sunset Park. We shared a block with a custom furniture place, a photographer, and an internet porn company. I opened the plain front door and let Raven in first. She turned on the lights. I locked the door behind us. After David Copperfield built Butchie's Lingerie, the false storefront to mask his warehouse, all the magicians in town wanted to do the same. Unfortunately, we didn't have Copperfield's money. I shared the warehouse with 2 other magicians, both of whom used it primarily as a storage facility. It helped pay the rent. The front office at our place looked like a fabric shop, but that was because it was where we did all the sewing. No hidden doors or electrified toilet seats here. We had the front office, complete with conference cutting table, a ratty green couch along the wall, and a mini fridge that was almost never stocked with anything Raven wanted. She looked anyway.
Still drinking that crap, I see.
Help yourself. She took out a bottle and tossed it to me. It was an old ritual, one we fell back into easily. I opened the door to the rest of the building. The back area held a decent-sized space filled with props, illusions, some tools, and, tucked away in a far corner, a stage for rehearsals. It was crowded, but not packed. The walls were covered with show posters, autographed pictures, and pin-ups. It made the place look smaller than it really was. I turned on the stage lights rather than the work floods. No need to really light the place. Raven walked around as if reacquainting herself with an old friend.
It's been a while.
She looked good, slipping in and out of shadows amongst the illusions. It had indeed been a while. Too long. She walked up to the artist's dream and stopped. I sipped my beer and watched her. It was a simple illusion, a way to produce an assistant. On the front panel was a picture of the girl. It was briefly covered, and then, just like that, the girl was standing there, and only a silhouette remained on the panel. Very Galatea, or My Fair Lady. Either way, the artist was bringing to life the girl of his dreams. I smiled as she pulled down the front panel. It was still set with her photograph. I hadn't done the trick since she left. I think that pleased her. Raven and I had stopped working together professionally about 1.5 years earlier. The jobs dried up for the big shows in town, and I really didn't want to work the ships. They weren't my kind of crowds. They were looking for safe, and I equated that with boring. At least doing what I was doing, hustling tourists to give them the street magic experience, gave me the opportunity to keep my close-up chops. Doing nothing but boxes on a cruise ship was death to me. Besides, the ships didn't really approve of you laying a week's salary on red. So I didn't go, and Raven quit being my assistant. We stopped seeing each other personally not long after. Seems I wasn't fulfilling potential, was only hurting myself, and she was tired of supporting me and my bad habits. That's the thing about habits, though. Everyone has them. And I was Raven's. Just because we'd stopped dating didn't mean she wasn't available for a quick fuck whenever I was in the mood. We had something together neither of us had alone, and for her it was a driving force. "Do you have an idea?" she asked, without looking at me. She had made her way to the stage. It was the first time I'd seen her completely lit in months. She still took my breath away. Did I have an idea? There was a mattress propped against the wall behind the stage. It wasn't clean, but it was more comfortable than the floor. I might. Maybe she could hear my thoughts in my voice. Maybe she knew me as well as I thought I knew her. Maybe it was all part of the game we were both playing. But she turned and stared across the room at me. She smiled. A sad smile. "I like fresh sheets these days, remember? It's not like it was." We'd been on that mattress more times than I could count. It was what we did during rehearsals, after shows, before breakfast. But she was right. It wasn't like it was. She was in trouble, and I was here to help. She wanted me to be her white knight, but I was rusty. I drained my beer. The right lubrication can ease any passage. "Did you give back the diamonds?" She looked at me like I was a black man at a clan meeting. Of course. Sharon pegged her for the body, not the brains. I wanted to laugh. The layman realizes how little the illusionist actually does, though. The magician dances out his choreography while the assistant does all the work, squeezing and running and hiding while the props move around them. One false move, and it's the girl in the box who's getting impaled while the magician wields the blade. Sharon didn't know you took them. It was the only explanation. And he didn't know anything else was gone. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handmade velvet bag. I'd seen it before. She got it when she bought a necklace from a beach vendor in Santa Monica. She used it to keep her valuables. And now he knows either me or Paul has 'em, and I'm sending you away? You can have half. I'm covered, thanks. I got what I was after. She turned toward the back door. This was a mistake. I could have let her go. I could have let her walk out the door and face whatever was beyond it. That would have been the smart thing to do. Wait. I was never that smart. She turned back, grateful. I didn't move. She crossed the floor and into my arms, hugging me hard. I didn't want to, but I hugged back. It was a reflex. "Oh, Remy," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you. I was so scared." The words trailed off as I turned my head. Her fears melted into passion. Just another emotional outlet. I lifted her up, her lips still locked with mine, and set her on the impaled table. The floor would have been more comfortable. The bottom half of impaled was the receptacle. Perched above it, Murphy bed style, was a rack of sharp metal spikes, real ones. It was part of the gag. The magician would prove the spikes were real while the assistant was being chained to the table. A light would be positioned behind her and a thin curtain in front, so the audience could see her struggling. There was a time limit, artificially imposed, something to add more drama to the situation. When the clock ran out, the spikes would fall, and if the girl was still there, well... At just the right time, though, the light went out, the spikes fell, and the girl reappeared someplace else, safe and sound. It was foolproof. There was a safety catch so the spikes couldn't fall if the girl was still chained up, and she had a foot switch to release the spikes when she was in position. It looked dangerous and evil. It was the kind of illusion I could never perform on a cruise. It was a new prop in the warehouse, and I'd never before used it for this purpose. It supported our combined weight nicely, creaking and groaning along as if it were an active participant in our love-making. Afterwards, we lay there in each other's arms, slowly becoming aware of the cold metal table beneath us. She laughed as I shivered.
"Can you really get me out of here?"
I held her face in my hands and looked directly into her eyes. "I'm gonna get us a blanket first." She laughed again when I rolled off the table. I bumped my hip as I got to my feet. I looked over at her. She was beautiful. For just this moment, it was like it was. I went into the front office to grab a blanket. Raven had rolled over, away from me, when I returned. She was still naked. I stopped and looked at her, wishing she didn't have to go away. But I knew there was no other choice. If she was still here, it was dangerous for everyone involved. As I approached the illusion, I hit the foot release. I made myself watch as the spikes came down. She turned her head at the sound, but there was no chance to get out of the way. She didn't even have time to scream. With an illusion, there's no point in a slow death. Of the 40 spikes, no more than 6 or 7 hit her, but it was enough to do the job. The rest slid into their proper channels with a sickening metal-on-metal grate. The blood channels, built into the table for show, worked just like they were supposed to, draining the red flow away from her body and collecting it in a basin at the foot of the table. I threw the blanket I was still holding over the whole mess. I got dressed before I retrieved the diamonds from her pants pocket. I had plans for the little beauties. The blood was overflowing, dripping on the floor. The basin was never really meant to hold anything. I grabbed a rag to sop it up. The back door opened. Pierre Charon stepped in, cell phone in his hand. She called me. "When?" I asked, not looking up. "Now." I went to the other side of the table and lifted the blanket. Her eyes were still open, still filled with shock and horror. Her cell phone was in her hand, the connection still open. "She fingered you from the beginning." "It had to be one of us." "You made the right choice." I stood up and tossed the velvet bag to him. It was caught and pocketed in one motion. I was on my honor they were all there. "We good?" He looked from the bag in his hand to the dead body and back again. He had the diamonds and someone to blame for it. "We're good," he said. "Now what?" I asked. He tilted his head toward Eastern Boulevard. "Eden Memorial. We've cashed in a few favors." By the time the hole was filled, the sun was just beginning to rise. Sunrise in Las Vegas is something to behold, the way the rays reflect off the gold and brass of the strip hotels. With no way to know from which direction the light is really coming, there's no way to set your compass. I lit a cigarette and basked in its directionless glow.